Both New York and Philadelphia have made significant changes to their metro system maps over the past several months, which makes it the perfect time to ask, what makes a transit map good? And also, are the transit map redesigns in these two cities any good? Answering the question of what makes a transit map good will allow transit advocates and transit riders to understand what sort of improvements we should be advocating for with said maps. Improvements that, I might add, are meant to make sure that our transit systems are user friendly for all, even for new residents and tourists of cities. But how do you get it right? The answer to this big question is simple, yet deserves an explanation. It's simple because you can summarize the answer in a few words. Good transit maps help people figure out how to get from point A to point B. But a few things need to be done to accomplish this. The first basic thing is making sure that the names of the stops are easy to read. After all, if you can't read the stops that are important to you on your journey, how are you going to avoid getting lost? Most train system maps I've seen do a reasonably good job with this. But one transit map that falls short in this category is Chicago. For whatever reason, the makers of this map think that humans can easily turn their heads 90 degrees so that they can see where the east west stations are. It's frankly difficult to read. There are plenty of other cities that have east west lines, yet manage to make things much more readable than Chicago's map. LA's map takes a different approach than San Francisco's map, but both do it in an infinitely more readable fashion than Chicago, despite the fact that Chicago built its system decades before either California city. Chicago, your map needs an upgrade. But in addition to making the names of the stops clear, you also need to make it clear which trains stop at which stations. That way, you know which trains to get on and which trains to transfer to. Once again, most maps in the US do relatively well in this area. But this is an area where the New York City subway is always going to be challenged, due to the number of variations you have with subway service. This may blow the minds of people who've never visited New York, but the service could be vastly different, depending on whether it's rush hour, a midday, an evening, or the overnight hours. Service patterns could be different on weekends from weekdays. Oh, and speaking of weekends, because many parts of New York's subway system were built when my great grandparents were children, it requires a lot of maintenance work, which results in portions of the subway lines being closed or changed substantially on the weekends. Furthermore, I think you need to make it clear which other major transit lines, whether it be commuter trains, frequent buses, or trolleys, offer connections from trains at different stations. I don't think you need to go full Portland and list all of the bus connections, but something akin to what the MBTA in Boston does would help. With the MBTA map, you can figure out how to connect with Amtrak, the regional rail routes, the Silver Line Bus Rapid Transit, and the frequent bus routes. Parts of me wonder whether the MBTA map has a little bit too much visual clutter, but I'm a big fan of how their map recognizes that many people's journeys don't exclusively involve the Green Line or one of their heavy rail lines. Expanding beyond visuals for individual stations, you need to make it visually clear where the lines begin, where lines end, and where lines go. An example of a good transit map in this category, in my opinion, is the WMATA map for the DC Metro Rail system. The use of distinct colors makes it easy and clear, at least in my opinion. I can't think of any American rail systems that do particularly poorly in this department, but DC does it particularly well. And that's pretty much it. You need to show clearly the names of the stops, which trains stop at these stations, which other major transit lines connect with these train stops, and where the train system lines go. I'm sure I'm missing other criteria for what makes a transit map good. And if I am, please let me know by informing me in the comment section below. Now that we've established criteria for what makes a transit map good, let's take a look at the two recent train map redesigns I've heard about. Let's see if these redesigns are any good. And the way we'll evaluate this is by seeing whether there are any ways the redesign maps are better or worse than their predecessors. The first redesign we're going to look at is with SEPTA in Philadelphia. Let's start with the old map, which I'm showing right now. The train stops are relatively easy to read, though I must admit, particularly around Center City, Philadelphia, there's a fair bit of visual clutter that detracts from the readability a little bit. I'm kind of nitpicking here, but I have to nitpick here. It's also easy to figure out which trains stop at which stations. Granted, service patterns on SEPTA are, for the most part, pretty consistent, thus meaning that what you see is almost always what you're going to get. There are exceptions here and there, such as the express trains for sporting events, but that's the exception, not the norm. The map also shows connections between the heavy rail and other types of rail in SEPTA's very diverse network. It even shows the Amtrak connection at 30th Street Station. But bizarrely, this map is missing other connections to Amtrak in the Philadelphia area, despite how underrated these stations are in terms of importance. To put into context how underrated some of these suburban Philadelphia stations are, Ardmore has more Amtrak riders than Albuquerque. Paoli has more Amtrak riders than Pittsburgh. Exton has more Amtrak riders than El Paso. And Downingtown has more Amtrak riders than Dallas. Granted, the cities I'm comparing suburban Philly to would have many more Amtrak riders if they had better Amtrak service. But that's a topic for a whole series of videos I have on my channel. Still, my point is that SEPTA's old map had missing information, especially when it came to connections to Amtrak. And forget about showing connections to the major bus lines. As is, this old SEPTA map struggles a bit with visual clutter, especially around Center City, Philadelphia. And it would be so much worse if they added the bus connections to the mix. Last, it is clear where lines begin and end, as well as where the lines go. Unless you're talking about the trolleys, in which case you had these weird arrows. It's almost as if those who drew the map just got to a point where they gave up on drawing, and were like, okay, just to finish this up, we'll draw arrows depicting where the trolley should go. Overall, the old SEPTA map was okay, I guess, but definitely had room for improvement. But what about the new SEPTA map? With the online version of the new app, you do have to zoom in to see the different station stops and where the lines go. But because it is a larger map, it is visually less cluttered around Center City, Philadelphia. It's also still easy to figure out which trains to change to and where. This was not a problem with the system map to begin with, but it's good that it remains a strength of the SEPTA map. But where this new map really shines, in my opinion, is in showing connections between rail and bus, as well as in showing connections between SEPTA rail and non-SEPTA rail. Remember how I said that there are no indications of how to connect to major bus lines from rail lines? Well, you can do that here, which I think is quite helpful. And the labeling is so much better. Not just of Amtrak stops in the Philadelphia area, but also of New Jersey transit services, such as the Atlantic City Line and the River Line. It's almost as if this map recognizes that people's commutes might actually involve more than one transit agency. One thing I'm a little indifferent about: the rebranding of the lines. While I get they're wanting to consolidate their multiple types of service under a SEPTA Metro banner, I'm not sure that doing this will make one bit of difference. Just my take. So, these are my opinions on the old and new SEPTA maps. Now for my opinions on the old and current New York City subway maps. Now to the old map. The train stops are pretty easy to read. Even in areas that have a ton of trains, the stops are easy to read and not insanely cluttered. I think a lot of that is helped by the fact that the makers of the modern day New York City subway maps have given up on any semblance of geographic accuracy. Like, Staten Island is over twice as big as Manhattan, but you wouldn't be able to tell that by looking at this subway map. Where any subway map for New York is going to struggle, and this old map of New York City subway is no different, is in depicting which trains stop at which stations. The reason I say this is that, as I highlighted earlier, the time of day of the week, and or maintenance work can have a huge impact on which trains serve which stations. The old map tries to address this by describing how service on some lines can be different on nights and weekends. But there are some service patterns that can be different on the middays or the evenings. That's resulting in this map being thrown off further. For example, there's a period of the evening, from about 9 p.m. to 11 or midnight, when the M train in New York only goes between Metropolitan Avenue in Queens and Delancey Street, Essex Street in Manhattan. This is not really depicted on this map. I think the old map had a lot of room for improvement in terms of showing connections between the subway lines and the major non subway lines. Of note, the old map didn't show connections between subway trains and select bus service routes, which is the closest thing New York City has to bus rapid transit. Additionally, the map did not clearly show connections to Amtrak or to PATH, the heavy rail system connecting New York City to urban areas of New Jersey just west of New York City. And the map more or less shows where lines begin and end, as well as where lines go. That said, because of how many train lines converge on Manhattan's major avenues, I can easily see it getting confusing for people. It can be confusing because, in those parts of the map, you only see one line on some of the avenues, despite the fact that there are 3 or 4 subway lines running along some of these avenues. The old map tried to compensate for this by showing not just the station names, but also spelling out the lines that stop at each station. Overall, the old map was fine. As a New Yorker, I love this map. But as someone attempting to be objective for the purposes of this video, I will admit that this map had room for improvement. As for the new map, the train stops are still easy to read. Once again, sacrificing geographic accuracy really helps this map from a readability standpoint. As for depicting which trains stop at which stations, any static map, such as what I'm showing right now, is going to struggle, due to the aforementioned issue of service patterns changing depending on what day of the week it is, what time of day it is, and or maintenance work. But at some of the subway stations, I've started to notice a really amazing feature that I think the MTA should work on incorporating everywhere: a map of the system that changes depending on what time of day it is and what day of the week it is. For example, I was in an L train station the other weekend and was extremely impressed with how it depicted weekend service, where weekend construction work on the subways impacted service, and what alternatives you can use for your travel where service was impacted. I think the MTA should double down on this technology, because using the technology will allow customers to have accurate service patterns displayed at just about all times. I think this map is also improving on its predecessor in terms of showing which types of other train and bus connections exist at different stations. I say that because this map actually shows connections to New Jersey Transit, PATH, and Amtrak, something the previous map didn't do. However, this map still doesn't show connections to select bus service lines. Considering that many of these select bus service lines are on streets that would have subway service if it weren't so dang expensive to build a subway line, I don't get why they don't list transfers between trains and select bus service lines. And this map does a better job of showing where lines go than the previous map. I think the fact that each line literally gets its own line on the map means that you can more easily visualize where some of the train lines go, especially in Manhattan, where it's not uncommon for 3 or 4 lines of the same color to converge on one of the avenues. And the map still spells out the lines that stop at each station, albeit in a different way from the previous subway map. In summary, I think the new map in New York does a better job than the old map. By quite a bit, in fact. It's not a perfect map, but it's definitely an improved map. If I have a complaint, it's that it might have been cheaper to wait on a map redesign until there is a change in service pattern proposed. That might save the MTA a little bit of money, because they'll need to print out new maps again in a matter of months. So those are my thoughts on what makes a train map good. If you have other opinions on what makes a train map good, or opinions on whether the redesign maps of New York and Philadelphia are any good, please let me know in the comment section below. Make sure to also like this video and subscribe to my channel for more content on imagining better rail transit in the United States. Thank you, and have a good day.